The following events occurred just over 200 galactic standard years ago. It was the last time there was an armed conflict amongst the spacefaring peoples of the galaxy. This is the story of how the Long Peace came to be. There have been spacefaring races traveling the galaxy for thousands of years. We don't know for sure who was first, as there was no standard methods for dating events back then, and depending on where a species evolved, they may have been more or less isolated from others. They might have found their neighbors on the galactic doorstep, or traveled for a century or two before finding another species. Regardless of how long it took, when a species finally made contact, they found a busy galaxy, with hundreds of races exploring, trading, and, often as not, fighting. The galactic community was chaotic and diverse, and amazing to new races, but they all eventually integrated into the galactic community, more or less. It was generally accepted procedure to leave system-bound species alone until they had developed technology sufficient to allow them to travel outside their home system. Usually some form of FTL drive, warp drive or similar. This event also usually coincided with their own maturing into a peaceful people, ready to participate in galactic life. Unfortunately, some species didn't mature, or evolve to consider warfare a way of life. Their integration into the galactic community was more painful, often more bloody, but in the end, these too were accepted into the community. There was no other way, really. The majority of species saw war as a dangerous, expensive last resort, but enough species were trigger-happy that even peaceful cultures maintained vast defensive networks out of necessity. The concept of mutual destruction reigned, but did not stop war. Little conflicts with acceptable losses and minimal collateral damage occurred, but there were rules. When conflict did erupt between two species, the rest of us just left them alone. It was too dangerous to get involved. The few times that major war broke out between species that dragged other species in with it, the results were catastrophic. At least 5 species had become extinct in recorded history. Several more became homeless wanderers, and many simply lost the advanced civilization that was required to move among the stars, their planets being devastated and their cultures decimated. It was far safer to let things take their course, and afterwards, when some form of stability returned, to re-establish contact and trade with whatever was left, assuming anything was. This was the way of things for thousands of years, until the humans showed up. The first human contact was a surprise to everybody, but especially the humans. They had only recently left their home system, which, being out on the arm of the galaxy and sparsely populated, went unnoticed. Then, one day, a human ship appeared over a populated planet. Just literally appeared, as in no drive signature, no acceleration, nothing. Empty space 1 minute, a 500-meter long by 200-meter diameter ship the next. The excitement on both sides was intense. The humans shocked and delighted to find themselves in orbit over a planet with an advanced culture and several billion inhabitants, were eagerly trying to establish contact. Seems they delight in just talking to people, and were giddy meeting other sentient life. The planetary government, however, panicked. Fortunately, the planet's defense sensors detected no weapons on the human ship. None. The leadership suspected that perhaps they had some method of cloaking their ship's interior, but the scanning provided so many other details that this was unlikely. Later on, when the diplomats visited the ship, surreptitious examinations proved the scans correct. No weapons at all. This was, well, odd to say the least. Even peaceful peoples maintained some defensive capability. The humans, however, besides having the strongest shielding we've ever seen, had none. Apparently the shielding was necessary because their ships sometimes popped out of transit, uncomfortably close to things like asteroids, planets, or stars. Their first explorers must have been either brave beyond belief, or insane, or maybe a bit of both. They'd gotten their navigation refined to a point where they could put a ship a centimeter away from an asteroid, if they wished, and pop away before the ship's gravity had time to tug the asteroid out of orbit. Quite impressive, actually. Our diplomats found the human explorers, for that's what they were, a group of scientists exploring what humans called deep space, to be curious, open, and honestly happy to have met them. The humans had an almost childlike innocence to them, curiosity, and an almost frightening thirst for knowledge. After talks had been progressing, one of the diplomats casually asked the question that the entire diplomatic corps and defense leadership was intensely curious to know. A younger diplomat whose inexperience at interspecies relations explains his bluntness. "So, Captain, why does your ship travel without any sort of defensive capabilities?" the youngster asked. The human captain replied, "We don't need any. Should we complete transit near a large body that threatens the ship, we can easily reposition the ship before there's a danger of collision. If we can't move quickly enough, our shields provide protection until we can. However, our navigation AI is very good, and such events are exceedingly rare." "Ah, yes," replied the diplomat. "But what about threats from other species?" At this, the human captain thought for a moment and said, "Well, a ship is pretty much a small body. We'd avoid that as quickly as possible to prevent risk to everyone involved. We wouldn't want to accidentally hurt anyone." This answer caused a bit of confusion, as the diplomatic staff began to understand that the human captain wasn't thinking of another species as a threat. "But what if they attacked you? Space pirates or Corellian dreadnoughts or something?" the young diplomat blurted out. "How would you survive?" At this, the human captain paused for a time. The range of emotions on his face went from surprise to disappointment, then to sadness. His answer told us a lot about humans, or so we thought. "We gave up our weapons long ago. We've managed to accept our own internal differences, and learn that we can accomplish a great deal through peaceful cooperation. We've overcome our violent past, and we had assumed that any species advanced enough to achieve space travel would have also evolved to a point where violence was something only talked about in history lessons." "So you carry no weapons at all, but what if you find that you need them?" The young diplomat's confusion was apparent. It wasn't cleared up by the human captain's short answer. "We don't think we ever will." There was a stunned silence. The diplomatic party wasn't sure if this was extreme ignorance or arrogance on the human's part. But it wasn't our business to judge. We thought that the humans would eventually learn the error of their ways, but we were wrong. It wasn't the last time we were wrong about the humans either. We eventually developed a long-standing relationship with the humans. Trade agreements were signed. We exchanged all sorts of materials, tools, culture. Anything and everything had some value. The humans, for their part, wanted information. They craved knowledge. Our history, culture, literature, music, all had value to them for some reason. They were especially interested in finding other cultures. We provided contact information, locations, language, and cultural data on many of the more peaceful species we had dealings with. Given their lack of defensive capabilities, we only provided them with contacts with the more peaceful species. We didn't want to be the cause of the humans being wiped out in a war we accidentally initiated. The only things the humans wouldn't trade for were the source of their ship's power and the design of the transit drive. Their impressive shielding wasn't any more advanced than ours, but it appeared to be fed with almost limitless supplies of energy, making them impervious to any threat. There was a human ship that had transited to the region of space, occupied by a gravitic singularity, a black hole, the humans called it. The human ship survived, even though they were far enough inside the event horizon that the time dilation effect made almost 70 of their years pass outside the black hole before their near-instantaneous escape transit kicked in. One of our scientists asked a human engineer about their transit drive once, in the early days, before the humans became more tight-lipped about the technology. The answer shocked him. We had warp drive like everyone else in the galaxy. We travelled in little folded bubbles of space at faster-than-light velocities. They worked, but it still took time to get places. So we went bigger. Our ships travel, but they never really move. We simply fold space, bringing the 2 points where we are and where we want to be together. And we depart and arrive at the same time. Simple, really. But the energy required for that, exclaimed our scientist. It has to be more than a combined output of all the stars in the galaxy. The human engineer looked amused. We thought so too, but we found a math error. Seems it only takes about a quarter of that. Our ship's power sources provide that, and more than enough to run shields indefinitely. But how? Our scientist asked. Well, it has to do with harvesting energy out of a quantum vacuum, where matter and antimatter spontaneously come into existence, and instantaneously annihilate each other, releasing vast energy. We can harvest and compress that. Sort of, the human engineer explained. I'm an engineer, not a physicist, so I make the mechanics of it work, but the deeper theory? Well, it gives me a headache most of the time. Our scientist looked down at the human engineer's console, realizing for the first time the magnitude of the power contained inside the shimmering silver energy fields, just beyond the enclosure. The look of anxiety and fear must have been apparent even to the human, as he immediately reassured the scientist. Oh, no worries. Everything is contained and fail-safe. We haven't had a core breach in almost a century. Excellent safety record, really. Besides, if anything did fail catastrophically, we wouldn't be around long enough to realize it. Poof! Reduced to subatomic particles in nanoseconds. The human engineer's glib remarks did little to reassure our scientist. For the humans and the rest of the galaxy, things progressed nicely. The humans explored, met new species, made friends, or at least didn't make any enemies. We had advised everyone we could that this new species was extremely pacifistic and unarmed. This did help when their ships popped out of transit over new planets, which tended to scare the locals. The humans travelled and mostly established trade agreements, or at least diplomatic missions. To them, cultural exchange was almost as important as trade. Then, one day, a human ship popped out of transit over a planet controlled by a warlike species, the Slat. They were non-humanoid, a multi-appendage exoskeleton species. A large body bulb in the middle of an odd number of legs, multiple eye stalks, and a variety of manipulative appendages, from prehensile soft tentacle-like to steel hard pincers. This planet was being used at the time as a staging area for a planned attack on a neighbouring species. The human ship just popping up in orbit like that was unexpected and unwanted. The response was swift and extreme. The Slat launched a salvo of anti-ship weapons, particle beams, and a few mass energy weapons. The human ship simply blinked out of existence before any weapon reached their position. It reappeared in a new location over the planet a moment later. "We apologize if we have startled or offended you," the humans broadcast. "We come in peace and wish only to establish diplomatic relations." The Slat response was even more intense, given the failure of their first attack. This time, the largest weapons possible were used. Antimatter annihilation-powered weapons, capable of destroying even the miles-long armored dreadnoughts, were launched. This time, the human ship remained where it was. A small supernova appeared at its location as the weapons detonated on target. When the debris and radiation dissipated, the Slat was shocked to see the small human ship sitting there, undisturbed. The human captain transmitted again, this time slightly distorted due to the massive energy residue in the space surrounding his ship. "We apologize again if we have frightened you. We mean no harm, and only wish to establish contact with new species for the exchange of knowledge and technology. We will leave your system in peace if you wish." The Slat leadership thought on this. Seeing as they could do nothing else, they transmitted a simple request. "Please leave. Tell no one what you saw here." The human response was a single word. "Acknowledged." And their ship disappeared with the startling suddenness of transit. But the Slat thought about what had happened. The technology they had just seen. The power that would enable them to take galactic control. Never, even in their wildest dreams, could they imagine it. So the Slat began inquiring about the little ships that popped in and out of space. Every species that they asked said the same thing. Humans, completely harmless, not even any weapons. Each species that was asked also thought that the humans were going to see the need for weapons now. The Slat selected a remote human colony world of 6 million inhabitants for their first strike. Their plan was simple. Arrive in force over the planet, occupy it, steal any human technology so they could reverse engineer it, and then leave no survivors to report on their activities. The initial appearance of several Dreadnought-class ships and a few hundred destroyers, carriers, corvettes, and others over the planet didn't seem to initially worry the humans. In fact, they simply issued standard orbital parking instructions and assumed they'd be meeting this new species shortly. The Slat launched several shuttles, each one heading to a large human city on the planet, and each one loaded with an antimatter weapon. The initial strike devastated the planet's population, as the humans, unsuspecting, hadn't raised shields or taken any defense posture, as if they even could have. The waves of assault dropships came next, occupying the smaller settlements, rounding up humans, collecting technology as fast as they could. For the Slat, everything was going according to plan. Well, almost everything. The first failure was a single human ship had been in orbit when they arrived. This ship's crew, after seeing the attack and devastation, immediately transited out of the system. The remaining ships in orbit, being of non-human origin, were simply destroyed. The spaceport went up in a sympathetic explosion before anyone realized what was going on. The risk that they would not be able to maintain secrecy was accepted by the leadership during the mission's planning, so the escape of a single human ship didn't upset High Command much. Confident they had nothing really to worry about from a human response, this was merely a diplomatic nightmare, one they could easily shrug off with the stolen technology. The second failure was not understanding the humans. The record of events was recovered from a military intel satellite dropped by the Slat on the outskirts of the system. This was a standard practice for later analysis and battle damage assessment. From its charred memory core, the Slat discovered why the mission had gone so terribly wrong. A Slat infantry unit had surrounded the human power station. The sole surviving member of the staff left inside was the chief engineer, who had managed to barricade himself in, and created some smaller version of their shield system around it. The local Slat commander believed the situation to be well in hand, and began the systematic execution of captives and general destruction. No one knows what the human engineer had planned, but the Slat had found her family. In an effort to get her to surrender and get access, they executed her family in front of the power station. They thought this would crush the human's will to fight. She screamed and cried and collapsed, and things remained static for some time. The Slat thought they had things under control. The human had other ideas. The last images transmitted from the power station showed the human engineer holding one of her fists clenched, the single central digit extended vertically, while the other hand punched a series of commands on a console. What happened next hadn't happened in centuries. The engineer had triggered a core breach, bypassing all failsafes. The resulting explosion destroyed the planet, all the ships around it, and much of the inner system in something resembling a star going nova. The star bobbed a bit in its orbit as the system's gravity readjusted to the rapid, violent redistribution of mass and energy. None of the Slat, humans, or any living things remaining in the system had survived. The Slat analyzed the mission failure. The escaping human ship had warned other systems. The humans now kept their shields raised around entire planets. Incoming cargo vessels were cleared, and the shields lowered to allow them to land. While slightly inconvenient, this kept things calm for a while. The Slat acquired several cargo ships of alien design and landed them on another human colony. This landing was successful at first, but the landing force, after establishing a foothold around the spaceport, found itself inside a human shield. The humans, having no choice, had simply erected a spherical shield around the entire spaceport and asked for the Slat to surrender. They refused. The humans started reducing the volume of the shield. As the volume inside the shield shrank, the shimmering energy wall bulldozed everything in its path towards the center of the sphere. The Slat retreated as far as they could. The shield wall, inexorably pushing all matter and energy inwards, panicked Slat troops and caused mass casualties as they tried to shoot their way out. But nothing worked. Finally, when the bubble became so small that the troops inside were standing on each other, piles of debris, vehicles, weapons, and bodies, all a single large mass contained within the shield's bubble, the air pressure so high that breathing was difficult, the humans stopped the compression. Once again, the humans asked for a surrender. The Slat only had to lay down arms, walk out, and they would be taken off planet. Such ignominious defeat was unacceptable, however, and they refused. With a look of sadness on their faces, the humans set the controls for minimum shield diameter, which was a bit less than half a meter. In a split second, the remains of the entire Slat landing force, all their ships, spaceport buildings, weapons, and everything else, had been compressed to a sphere half a meter across. It was so dense that it promptly sank into the planet's crust. There were a series of earthquakes as the compressed mass reached the molten mantle, where it was allowed to expand and be absorbed by the magma. The resulting hole was left unfilled, and named the Well of Tears, for the humans had lost family and friends there, but also a long, long history of peace had finally ended. The rest of us in the galaxy watched. As we did while these things happened, we waited for the inescapable Slat victory, and we waited hopefully to see how the humans fared in this conflict, as we had come to like them. We were also curious because of the lack of human weapons. What would they do? What could they do? At first they did nothing, or so we thought. We honestly didn't know what the humans would do, but what they did, well, we learned about humans. The humans sent a single ship. Just one. Their little ship appeared in the largest Slat military staging area that they had. An entire planetary system that had been converted to shipyards, weapons production, troop training, and housing. A vast military complex in an entire solar system. There were 6 planets, hundreds of space stations, and thousands of ships of all types. The human ship appeared over the command post for the system on one of the inner planets. They broadcast the following message. We came in peace, and found war, long forgotten and now resurrected. We will fight until you ask for peace. The Slat did not understand this, and gave it little thought. The single human ship wasn't anything they could do anything about, but it couldn't hurt them either. Or so they thought. Indeed, the human ship popped out of orbit a few seconds after the cryptic message. The Slat had no idea what to make of this. Mostly they went back to work. A few minutes later, they stopped working. Across the system, eyes turned towards the sun. It had taken an odd hue and... was it shrinking? Sensors were rapidly turned towards the system's central star. They found the tiny atom-sized speck of a human ship incredibly close to the star, and it was doing something to it. The star was shrinking, slowly at first, then more and more rapidly. What the humans had done was extend a shield bubble around the star and began to compress it, smaller and smaller, until its diameter was smaller than its event horizon, a mini black hole. The Slat forces watched in horror as the star shrank, and black night enveloped the system. The human ship then transited out of the system, back to who knows where. The star, its extremely compressed mass no longer bound by the energy wall of the shield, and without sufficient gravity to hold its mass in place, exploded. Physicists across the galaxy still argue about what happens inside those mini black holes, but the results were undeniable. The entire system was destroyed in a single massive supernova event. A few heavily damaged ships that had begun to warp away when the star went dark survived, to report the loss of the system to an incredulous Slat High Command. Scout ships sent to verify the reports could not approach closer than a few billions of miles, due to the expanding cloud of superheated plasma, aside from a small neutron star spinning and emitting X-rays in the center. There was nothing left. Unaware of the situation, the Slat actually increased hostilities. They attacked human ships in starports, any starport, human or otherwise. In some cases, the ships were able to extend their shields and save most of the port. In other cases, the entire starport was destroyed, leaving the human ship alone, intact, surrounded by death and destruction. Humans had no place to go, as their presence was sure to bring a devastating attack. For their part, the humans found the pointless loss of life tragic, and they decided to put an end to it, once and for all. We thought they meant the Slat War, but we were wrong. The humans sent ships, each time a single ship, and the message, "We came in peace, and will leave in peace," was transmitted. When they found a system completely occupied by Slat, they destroyed it by supernova, or other means. Eventually it seemed that the humans became almost bored, and began to find new ways of destroying Slat. One human captain actually transited the central star out of its system. The resulting chaos caused by the loss of its gravity set 8 planets and countless asteroids careening off into space, where without the heat of their star, they froze, becoming barren wastelands of frozen atmospheres, forever preserved in cold and vacuum while they wandered endless darkness. If that wasn't terrifying enough, that same captain transited this stolen star into a new system, creating a binary system completely inhospitable to life. Where humans found mixed systems, they used their energy shields like scalpels. They scooped Slat installations off planets, leaving hemispherical craters. They crushed or transited space stations and ships. One captain, apparently not wanting to be violent, would transit the Slat ship or station to a system 80,000 light-years way across the galaxy. The standard warp drive we used would take something like 800 years for them to return home. One human ship simply appeared over a major Slat installation and sat there, while the Slat pummeled her shields with every weapon they had. In the end, the location was uninhabitable due to the massive quantities of radiation. The Slat had to evacuate. The human ship simply transited away when the Slat ran out of munitions. Sometimes another species ship would enter a Slat system, only to find nothing. The entire system reduced to empty space. Scans showed no trace of what had happened, but everyone knew. humans had happened. As the rest of the galaxy watched in awe and horror, the Slat's holdings in the galaxy shrank. Their former occupied territories returned to indigenous control. Their vast fleets of miles-long dreadnoughts, planets of factories, entire solar systems of production, lost. The Slat casualties ran into the billions. Then they lost count. Finally, only a few systems close to the Slat homeworld remained. A single human ship, 500 meters long, 200 meters wide, appeared over their homeworld. Again, the message was broadcast. "We came in peace. We will leave in peace. You only need to ask." At long last, the Slat leadership had had enough. "Wait," came the reply. "Please wait." The human ship waited. "Will we have peace?" they asked. The Slat almost pleaded. "Yes, peace. Peace at last. Please. One request." "What?" asked the human ship. The Slat replied, "We are lost. So weakened by the war, we cannot even defend ourselves from the smallest aggressor. You will have your peace, but we will cease to exist as a people. Is this the price of your peace? Our ultimate destruction? If not by your hand, then by another's?" There was silence for a time. Finally, the human ship replied, "If you wish peace, then you must give up all weapons of war. Your warriors must be retrained, your science devoted to rebuilding. You must commit to peace. If this is your true wish, we will help you." The Slat replied, "But how will we survive? All will prey on us. Our former enemies, emboldened by our losses, will conquer and crush us." After another short time, the humans replied, "Then we shall protect you. We had hoped to find the galaxy filled with races of beings like us, seeking knowledge and enlightenment, growing through shared experiences. We desire this still. To all who ask, we will exist in peace, and we will protect the peace." That was over 200 standard galactic years ago. The humans, true to their word, helped the Slat rebuild. Now, the Slat are renowned for their ability to build, using what they learned from the humans and their own rebuilding efforts. They can terraform planets to order, build cities or ships of elegance, and efficiency previously unknown. As for the rest of the peoples in the galaxy, one by one we approached the humans and asked for peace. One by one the other races surrendered their weapons of war, and the humans accepted the hands, tentacles, or claws of friendship. A few species determined to test the truth of the humans' word, but the occasional disappearance of a ship, star, or solar system made them quickly realize war was no longer viable. A few races on the outskirts of civilization chose to remain outside and keep their militaries intact. The humans were fine with that too. If they didn't start trouble, the humans wouldn't have to end it. We had thought that we would now live under human overlords, a people with such power they could have established themselves as gods and tyrants, but they sought only to resume their endless quest for knowledge and trade. War has become the topic of the academic or historian, which every species ensures its younglings learn is too horrible to contemplate. The humans still use their little ships, but they are evolving beyond that. Now, if they want to go somewhere as a group, they simply take their entire planet with them. So much easier that way, they say. For individual travel, they've miniaturized the power source and drive to something a person could carry. A single human can pop into or out of existence right next to you, with little more than a slight change in air pressure to announce their arrival or departure. They call it popping in or popping out, an ancient term from their past, apparently. Still, we have learned not to panic, at the sight of a 500-meter long, 200-meter diameter ship just appearing out a thin vacuum over our worlds. They come in peace, after all. And they will leave in peace, if you ask.